Hello everyone, welcome back to my 12 Days of Christmas. We are here on day 2. My name is Christine, I run Kristinemas Photography, and today I want to talk to you about meteor showers. I love meteor showers. They make me feel like a kid again. To lay down outside and look up at the sky and see shooting stars going everywhere? Are you kidding me? It's amazing. And it just so happens that we are coming up on one of the biggest showers of the year, the Geminids meteor shower. Now, I say one of the best of the year. What makes it a good meteor shower? Well, we look at something called the zenith hourly rate, and that is how many meteors at peak can we expect to see. And with the Geminids, depending on where you're at, your latitude, you are going to be able to expect up to 150 per hour. And this year in 2020, combined with the fact that it's happening the night before the new moon, means we're not going to have any moon interference. It's fantastic. To get out and shoot the meteor shower, the very first thing you need to know is where to look. Yes, you look up in the sky, you will see meteors across the entirety of the sky, but they are coming from the radiant. Now, depending on the meteor shower, you are going to be able to probably figure out where that radiant is because of the name. So with the Geminids, the radiant is Gemini. Specifically, the meteors are going to look like they're radiating out from the star Castor. If you are shooting with a focal length of 24 millimeters or lower, and that's full frame, so do the conversion if you're shooting on APS-C or micro four thirds, you will have Orion on the right-hand side of your screen and the Geminids on the left-hand side. So you can get both Orion and the Geminids in the same frame, which can make for a really kind of compelling overall composition. Next up is when. When do you shoot? So you can start shooting as soon as it's full dark. I will say that you will see more meteors after midnight. And the reason for that is because of the way that the Earth is moving and interacting with the particles that are actually creating the meteor shower. So think of it this way. When you are driving in a car and there is snow coming down, in your windshield, you have all kinds of snow hitting it directly. If you look out the back, you see a few flurries coming down, but there aren't that many that are actually hitting the windshield. So before midnight, we're actually looking at the rearview mirror. We're looking at the space the Earth has just came from. So we don't see as many meteors because of that. But after midnight, we're looking towards where the Earth is going, which means we're going straight into the meteors. So you will see more meteors in the sky when you look up after midnight. One quick note that I'll say on that compositionally, the radiant will be much higher in the sky. Makes it easier to see them. It makes it more difficult to get the radiant and a foreground in your frame. So I will generally, when I start shooting that late at night, I'm gonna be shooting pretty wide angle so I can get both a foreground and the radiant in my same frame. Okay, so we know where to look and we know when to look. How do we shoot? What do we actually do? The first thing is to set your camera for interval shooting. So if you have an intervalometer, a timer remote, you can use that, or you can use if it's built into your camera. And that would be somewhere in your shooting menu, you would look for interval shooting. If you don't have that to set up, you're going to have to manually trigger your camera. So if you have a wired remote, you can use that to manually trigger your camera. Basically, after every single exposure you take, you're gonna click the shutter for it to go. Now, you're gonna click the shutter for it to go. Now, I don't really recommend doing that because you're gonna introduce a lot of shake, and you wanna bet when that really awesome meteor goes by, it's when you're going to click the shutter and you miss it. So if you don't have an interval remote and your camera doesn't have interval timing built in, I would recommend purchasing an interval remote for the next time a meteor shower comes around. For my exposure, I like to expose just a little bit darker than what I would do for the Milky Way, because I like to retain a little bit of more of the color in my meteors. Now this is done using a lower ISO. I am not going to be using a shorter shutter speed to get more color out of my meteors. Let's dig into that a little bit. Okay, your shutter speed is going to be determined by your focal length, or if you are using a star tracker, you're going to be able to use whatever shutter speed that you want. But we need to think on this a little bit more because meteors are moving through your frame. The stars are constant. constant. So the exposure for the stars is not going to be the same as what you would have as the exposure for your meteors. If I'm shooting without a tracker, my exposures are generally going to be between 15 to 30 seconds. So that's going to be decided by whatever my focal length is. And I'm probably shooting between f2 and 2.8 and around ISO 1600. If I'm using a star tracker, I need to be more careful because I can easily do a 2-minute or 4-minute exposure and have stars that are not blurred. However, when I do that, I am using a much lower ISO, or maybe I'm stopping down my aperture to get rid of coma or different aberrations that are in my image. Well, the problem with this is because I'm using my tracker, the stars that are staying in relatively the same place are being tracked by my camera. So because of that, the stars are building up light on my sensor. But that meteor that goes by only has that short moment of time where it gets recorded on your camera. If you are getting the desired brightness of your stars through your shutter speed, that is by using the tracker, you are not going to have the desired brightness you want of the meteor. So another way to say that is if you stopped down your aperture or you used a lower ISO because you are able to have a longer shutter speed because you're using your tracker, what's going to happen is your meteor that just went through is actually going to be too dark because it is independent of your shutter speed. So you have to make sure if you're using a tracker that you're using settings that are both good for the stars and for the meteor. I will often shoot meteor showers with my camera on my tracker at a 24 or 35 millimeter focal length. And when I do that, I'm going to have my settings at about a minute long, an aperture between f2 and 2.8, and ISO 1600. Now, you need to test those settings, of course. So whenever you get to where you are, you want to put those settings in and take a test shot and see what things look like. Varying levels of light pollution are going to have a really big impact on that, especially when you start to use longer exposures like that. It's going to let the light pollution build up. But that's my general go-to. I may, with my tracker, depending on how much light pollution there is, go down to ISO 800 at that 1-minute exposure. But I want to keep it to a point where I am retaining detail in my stars, but also getting enough light from my meteor. Okay, so we have where to look, we know when to look, and we know how to shoot it. One last note on gear. So I've mentioned focal lengths a few times throughout here. If you shoot with a really wide angle, you're going to get lots of meteors. And if you want to get the meteors and a foreground, that's much later at night, you need to shoot with a wide angle. However, those meteors are going to be pretty small. They're going to look farther away because of the focal length that you're using. If you shoot with a longer focal length, so 35 millimeters, 50 millimeters, you are going to cover a much smaller portion of the sky. But the meteors that you capture are going to look really impressive. The thing I will say is, very often when you're shooting at a longer focal length, you are going to miss a lot of meteors. And I only generally shoot with a longer focal length when I have another camera shooting with a wide angle. So there's a trade-off. Wide angle gets you lots of meteors, but they don't look as impressive. Longer focal length gets you less meteors, but they look really impressive. Okay, I hope that you have clear skies and you are able to get out and capture this meteor shower. I look forward to hearing how it went for you and to seeing images that you create.